Simone! Today's episode is going to be an interesting topic, or we are going to be going over new statistics on just how bad mental health is for the youth of this coming generation. It is worse than even the previous statistics may have indicated. What is likely causing it? I think a lot of people blame it on social media.
Oh, the phones. I'm so done with that. Enough.
The stats just don't agree with this. And it's not even an issue of the stats. I can look to my generation and look at who was the early adopters of intense social media usage, like myself and my friend group. And they actually had much higher mental health outcomes than the groups that were not using social media. So what we should not have seen is the individuals who were most using social media first with better mental health than the individuals who abstained from it in the early days. I think that this is downstream of something entirely different, specifically the lack of hardship, discipline, and boundaries that we are giving to young people.
Yeah.
And the stats we're going to go over that are shocking. Just to give you an example of like two that we're going to go over, 78% of parents in 2024 are practicing gentle parenting. That 78% by one study, 74% by a different study. That is terrifying if it's as bad as I suspect it is.
Are you going to share that clip that you shared with me on WhatsApp last night? Because that was terrifying.
Oh, which one?
She could be the next president.
I think some people may assume when they hear me telling stories about how when I lightly discipline a child in public, like even scolding them, I get accosted by people. And in this video, I think I'm pretty vindicated. You can see that any sane person would think this kid needs to be disciplined. But when people try to just restrain the child, other people are threatening to call the cops on them. And then in a different instance, yelling, "You don't know what she's been through."
They need to let her go. Ooh.
Don't yell at her. Don't yell at her. You don't know she's meant to. You don't know she's meant to. Don't report her. That doesn't matter. You don't know what she's meant to. Girl, you don't know what she's doing. Don't y'all do that to a little girl. Y'all don't know what she's supposed to be.
I want candy! Damn it, I hate you! You're ruining my
Herbert,
life!
remember our agreement? We have an agreement about how we behave in a store, Herbert.
Give me candy! Hello!
Have you ever tried beating his ass?
What was the bell?
Must have lost your goddamn mind!
Oh my God, the little girl who's like storming the store and like they want, like my kids doing that and I like discipline them and everyone's like, how could you?
Yeah, no, that's the crazy thing is I feel like you have caught more open animosity and public criticism for punishing our children's bad behavior that was orders of magnitude lower than that, but still bad, still openly bad and annoying, than that girl's parents were getting in that moment in Walmart as she was literally throwing bottles of sparkling beverage onto the ground and having the glass shatter and having liquid go everywhere. This was
her parents were getting less of a public freakout than I get for not even talking to kids.
Yeah, not even, just being like, no, we're leaving now. Yeah.
These parents want their kids to not experience anger at all, I'm realizing.
You have to end the cycle of abuse.
They were like, in the cycle. And I was like, how is that going to help the kids? I love it when they're like, if you don't do this with your kids, then they won't do it with theirs. Do you really want them to act this way towards their kids? I was like, yes, obviously.
Please.
You psycho.
Yeah.
Like, do I think that an evolved emotion, anger, it's supposed to communicate to other people, that kids are not supposed to see that's going to like be, but let's go to what happened from this, because there was a secondary phenomenon that layered on top of this, which created a generation of American Hikikomoris. And this secondary phenomenon was what happened during COVID. the completely unjust and horrifying school closures that individuals lost their jobs and careers campaigning against, like the lady who was next in line to be CEO of Levi's, and they canned her because she said this is disproportionately hurting poor children. By the way, all the stats say she was right.
She
But
clearly was. Everyone knows she was right. It was just
everyone knows she was right. The,
moment.
the,
Yeah.
the virus, the cordyceps virus, the urban monoculture is horrifying. It does not care about the damage it causes. But
Yeah.
I want to read some quotes from an article that I thought was really interesting called Ghost Children, the Pupils Who Never Came Back After Lockdown. And this is from The Spectator. Because after lockdown happened, there was this presumption that like we open up again and everyone comes back. And it just didn't happen. Like a huge chunk of the population just didn't come back. And we'll go over the stats on this, but here are some anecdotal quotes from what's going on in the school system right now from the perspective of people within it. A school counselor told me that countless kids sent to him for help fall into two groups. Either they are so crippled by anxiety or depression that they cannot leave the house, or they are angry and bitter, out on the streets and into crime and gangs. One 14-year-old girl told me, I just sit in my room. It's an awful feeling, like really scary and lonely. A 16-year-old boy I met on Streatham Street, hoodie pulled up over his afro, said, I'm upset I lost so much learning. I'm stressed I don't get the grades I need for college. In the last full school term, the autumn of 2019, shortly before the start of the pandemic, just 60,202 pupils were defined as severely absent. That is spending more time out of classrooms than in them. Since then, despite schools opening, this number has shot up, now over 140,000. It went from 60,000 to 140,000, more than doubling. Children are classified as severely absent, according to the analysis of official figures by the CSJ. That's a 134%, the increase of closing down 140 schools. Despite recent efforts, the numbers are continuing to surge. Children are turning their backs on education at an alarming pace, warns the CSJ. And here I will put a graph on screen of the number of kids who aren't coming back to schools. What is interesting is that a lot of people want to blame this just on COVID, but if you actually were to graph this, you can see the logarithmic increase beginning in 2017 and really going up in 2019, long before COVID. The Gentle Parenting book, it came out in 2016. So just consider that alongside this graph. Wow. But it's not just the usual suspects. Ghost children also exist among the high-achieving middle classes. One teacher in a London suburb at an all-girls school rated quote-unquote outstanding by Ostfed told me, the mental health issues among my girls is a pandemic in itself. A third of my pupils only turn up intermittently. This is at an expensive all-girls private school. A third of the students are only turning up intermittently. 30 girls have actually gone missing.
How can parents tolerate this? I mean, it's one thing I get, like if it's public school and you're not really into it and your kid's not thriving there.
In just a second.
Okay.
Before the pandemic, the school expected many of these girls to go to university and enjoy a career. But lockdown, the teacher said, totally derailed their plans. Their parents would say their characters have changed. They are a different person now. The pandemic has diminished their life chances. And here I note, again, you see this trend before the lockdown. I think this is more downstream of gentle parenting than just COVID. I think it's a accumulation of COVID and gentle parenting and the real mimetic viruses that are sweeping through this generation. And I think parents just don't understand what it's like to have mental viruses that are this overwhelming, this fascist in the way they impose themselves. I mean, it used to be the kids were scared because they go to school that had like these Judeo-Christian value systems that they felt they didn't measure up to, or they felt judged them. And they saw this as a horror. The problem is now they go to schools and those schools are controlled by like 3 extremely aggressive cults that are like sending your kids to a school controlled by Scientologists when we were kids.
I don't know, Scientologist kids seem to go to really cool private schools. I'm just saying, there was that one Scientologist school that looked like a castle.
No, these places are pretty horrifying. But if you look at the stats on them, the point that I'm making is that the urban monoculture is so much more totalitarian and fascist in how it implements its value system than the Christians ever were when they were the culturally dominant faction. And the horror that the kids go through growing up in a country that really is a dystopian, a fascist state run by a cult is horrifying, especially if they don't have support back home and they do not, and support, what support looks like is austerity and discipline. It's not, I love you and I support whatever you're doing. And we'll get to why that causes a lot of these problems. Now, to anyone here who wants to be like, oh, but the studies show gentle parenting works, I would, one, ask you to just exercise common sense, and two, point out the other video we made, The Scientists Lied About Spanking, which goes into the cover-up of a bunch of studies where they basically faked the data in the 80s by not doing matching results to make it look like spanking was causing negative effects on children, when we now know that it doesn't in the large meta-studies that have been done recently, like the paper in 2023, Parental Punishment, Don't Throw the Baby Out with the Bathwater. So for anyone who's like, oh, look at the studies, I'm like, oh, look at common sense. If you reward negative behavior with attention, you are going to get more negative behavior and hypersensitize kids to negative stimuli. Here, or just look at like basic anecdotal evidence. So here is a piece that somebody wrote in the Collegian, and I'll quote from it. When I nannied for millennial parents who raised their kids with quote-unquote gentle parenting philosophy, I saw disastrous results. This family was entirely based on communication. This meant for every negative or positive emotion one of the kids had, I would walk through it with them. I became the emotional regulator for 3 children under age 8. Rather than administering consequences for bad behavior, I found myself trying to reason with a 3-year-old having a tantrum after reminding him that throwing blocks at his sister was not kind. Now, to keep going, her school is not alone. Absence is now a feature of school life. Just under 2 million pupils, 1 in 4 of all school children, are classified as persistently absent, i.e. have an attendance rate of less than 90%. So 1 in 4 are attending school less than 1 out of 10 days.
Wow.
Double pre-pandemic levels. The teacher
Okay.
explained that one single mother has had to give up her job to concentrate full time on coaxing her daughter back into school, despite the fact she is the breadwinner, so it means real financial hardship. Wait, so the mom, who was the breadwinner of the family, quit her job. I guess the dad's not in the picture. It sounds like a dad or boyfriend is in the picture and the mom was supporting them to try to, because the male wasn't doing anything, to try to force her kid back into school. And
Dude, you just force why don't you drop them off and you're like, good luck.
Wait, well, we'll talk about why the kids aren't doing this and what it's like to be around these kids, because they're really afraid of any sort of like negative stimuli, even though bullying rates have not increased. Bullying rates are still at around 20%. And what we really need here is the clip from Futurama.
Most, perhaps all the blame rests with the parents. Have you ever tried simply turning off the TV, sitting down with your children, and hitting them?
Because I know this mom hasn't considered that. If your home is not like, if my kid knows, oh yeah, I don't go home during the day because I'm gonna get my butt whooped, they'll understand the situation. They're like, yeah, school is preferable. Now, that said, we actually plan to homeschool our kids, and I am concerned by how much my kid is enjoying school, because
we're never gonna force our kids into homeschool. If they want to do kindergarten, they get to do kindergarten, or they get to do public school or whatever.
Well, I always want public school to be the punishment. By that, what I mean is if they're falling behind in their homeschooling, it's public school.
Mm-hmm.
Not I took you out of public school so I could homeschool you.
Yeah, well, and public school is not considered their education. It's considered an extracurricular. So like it's like going to a soccer camp. We wouldn't consider soccer camp your source of math education ever, just like we wouldn't consider public school your source of math or any education. So, yeah.
Right. One girl told me her geography tutor had been really helpful, but that she had barely heard from the English staff at all. A boy described the impact of school indifference on his mood. The teachers didn't mark the work I had completed, not once, he says. With no feedback, this clever and competitive boy lost motivation. Confined to his room, he started to listen to rap music, which fueled his frustration and rage. When school reopened, it was only the intervention of his parents and months of counseling that turned him around. I was scared I had lost myself forever and become a different version of myself. They're just losing. They're losing hope. The viruses, the mimetic viruses that are spreading, that the cult is pushing on them, thrive by breaking their connection to their families, but the families themselves aren't providing the environment that they need. They're not providing the discipline they need. They're not, because that's what's needed to relate to the harsh world we live in. These kids act like it's like the hardest time in history, and I'm like, go read about what it was like being a kid during like the yellow fever epidemic, or like scarlet fever, or like any of the past, the Great Depression in the United States, you live an unimaginably cushy life. Your friends aren't like dying in their sleep. Most young people, they haven't even seen a dead body. Like, and that would have been normal before.
Mm.
And it is horrifying to me. The cocoon has created a hypersensitivity around negative stimuli for these children. And it is really, and we'll go into this more, but we talk about all the times that like we go viral for punishing our kids to any extent, and they're very light punishments that we've gone viral for. Like, we do not like heavily punish our kids or anything like that. I think that that's like totally unnecessary. The pain should never be the point of a punishment. It should be the disapproval and a way to show that they did something wrong without necessarily emotionally escalating. And this is unfortunately when I had to punish the kid when they're like, "Oh, you got angry at him." That was because I was afraid to hit the kid in front of other parents, because I was like, "Shit, so I have to get angry with him," because emotional escalation was the only way to show him he had messed up. If it was at home, I wouldn't have gotten angry at him. I just would have been like, "Bop, okay, like, let's talk about this. Like, what did you do wrong? What are you not going to do in the future?" Without emotionally escalating the situation, but I was forced to in that environment. I should note here, there's the big difference between kids, and not all kids need corporal punishment to be the way that they are disciplined. However, all children do need some form of discipline, something in their life that when they step over a boundary isn't somebody calmly sitting down next to them and talking it through them, but some sort of negative feedback, some sort of anger or genuine disapproval and exclusion. Because if they don't learn how to deal with that as a kid, they will not be able to deal with it in high school or in their adult lives. And they turn into these hikikomori, which we're seeing an entire generation turn into. It is infinitely more abusive to your child to not ever expose them to negative stimuli than even to expose them to fairly over the top negative stimuli. I think, Simone, what you're missing here is, as soon as a kid is allowed to hypersensitize to negative emotional stimuli, they can't be around them at all. And so you can go home and say like, "Hey, 2 months of counseling to get them back to school. Hey, you should go back to school. You should." But if they're already hypersensitized to anyone disapproving of them, to anyone being angry at them, how are they going to survive in a school environment, right?
I
Like,
well, I think the way I see it, and the way I've seen so many things like this and experienced it too, is everything is a muscle. And so if you allow someone's social muscles, leaving the house muscles, dealing with adversity muscles to atrophy to the extent that our modern society and parenting norms allow them to atrophy, you're going to end up with severely, kind of like those children, those feral children who grow up and never learned how to speak. And then finally they get rescued and people try to give them language and they can't, like, they never really develop language skills.
yeah.
I think that's happening with some forms of resilience and inhibitory control now. I think we're seeing the equivalent in terms of mental fortitude of different types and ability to focus and all these other things of feral children in a whole
Well,
generation.
yeah, and I think that parents, when they're thinking about like, what am I attempting to do? Like, when we look at parenting, I used to be like, everyone should parent in their own way. I am now no longer like, no one should be gentle parenting. I just think it's a bad philosophy. I think that parenting without discipline is obviously going to be incredibly hurtful to the kids. And your goal as a parent is to stoke the fire of the child's will as much as possible, their ambition, and that's what these children don't have, the fire that lights their insides.
Yeah.
Air.
Yeah,
The
that is
parents-
an interesting thing that accompanies the avoidance and the fear is also this intense ennui, where ennui is not a good enough word. It's lying flat's better, but that just zero drive or interest, deep depression.
Yeah, I wouldn't even say it's depression, because depression rates are not that much higher. We'll get to this in a second. A lot of other mental health issues are, but depression is around 20%, which is what it was historically. Note, I was wrong about this. Depression rate shot up a ton the past 10 years. It's just that they were relatively stable until about the past 10 years. This is specifically in young people.
Oh, but what I'm associating with depression here is just that lack of drive to do anything, even get out
Yeah,
of bed.
not real like clinical depression, but it looks different than clinical depression. It is,
Yeah.
ennui is a better word for it, as you said, but the way I would word it best is it's a lack of fire. And in a recent episode, we described the pronatalist movement as cucking society. And I think that that's all our goals. Not to cuck society in the way that people do even sexually speaking, but I'd say, because as we pointed out in the episode, everyone with under 2.1 kids is being cucked by the people with over 2.1 kids, because functionally you're contributing to a future, you're paying taxes to help raise genetic material that's going to replace you intergenerationally speaking. But if you watch cuckoo chicks, it's really like dramatic because they're much larger than even like the parents that are feeding them. So like the cuckoo chicks, you know, after they starve all the other little chicks in the nest, they'll be like twice the size of the parent that is feeding them. And this is the way I feel that you as a pronatalist need to be raising your kids' will to be. It needs to be their soul, their fire inside of them. They need to look like a little cuckoo chick when the teacher is pathetically trying to feed them, when the school system is pathetically attempting to discipline them in their weak way, where they look weak and pathetic and tawdry next to this big burly will of a child.
Cuckoos are brood parasites that trick smaller birds into raising their chicks. In this video, a larger cuckoo chick is being fed by a smaller foster parent that mistakenly believes it's its own offspring.
Because we have to replace them. Their weakness leads to immorality. See our episode on weakness and immorality in Friedrich Nietzsche. Because that's what's downstream of allowing this to spread and metastasize. We have to replace them. And that is done through fostering your children's will, not through breaking it. And this is another thing where I'm like, punish your kids, but do not punish them to break their will. Punish them because you want them acting up in the type of way where they frequently need to be punished. I think that this is a big difference between us and other parents, where other parents punish their kids so that they eventually no longer have to punish them, where I punish my kids so that I have a unique way of showing them where boundaries are, so they can explore breaking boundaries more often while knowing very clearly when they have. Now, to go back to the article, young people moving on to sixth form college are particularly vulnerable. A teacher in northeast of England says she has noticed the disappearance of a small number of 16 to 17-year-olds from lessons. They enrolled in the sixth form in September, but I have never seen them. She says, parents always give me the same reason for the children's absence. Their mental health is too fragile for them to attend class.
Wow.
Parents are at a loss and teachers are instructed by the authorities to not pursue an absence if it is for mental health reasons. We are told to just leave it be. You hope the services are there in the background, but we all know they aren't.
Let me ask you all something. Do you consider yourselves to be happy?
I don't think I'm very happy. I always fall asleep to the sound of my own screams.
Right. See, the reason that you are...
And then I always get woken up in the morning by the sound of my own screams. Do you think I'm unhappy?
Oh boy. Okay. I did not expect that.
No, it is bad. It is bad. I'd actually say, like, as I look more into the mental health stuff, and people would be like, oh, but don't you know the studies say that gentle parenting is good? And I'm like, yeah, and all the studies showed that spanking was bad in the 80s. And then when we rerun them without bad fudged data, it turns out that the big meta studies on this, the most recent studies on this, are like, oh, okay, actually it was good. Or non-effect, and they're not controlling for genetic effects. So of course that means highly good. So these studies I just don't buy. Like, if you look at the basic psychology of this, of course, if you shield a child from negative stimuli, they're going to hypersensitize to it.
Mhm.
Duh, is that not what we're seeing? What I hadn't realized is how big the number of parents were who were doing this, and that it really is explanatory of a lot of what's going on, more so than even the COVID lockdowns, because as you can see, the problem started before the COVID lockdowns.
Yeah.
I'll correlate this with when gentle parenting got popular as well. The gentle parenting book, it came out in 2016. So just consider that alongside this graph. But anyway, meanwhile, the CSJ report makes it clear. Oh, by the way, did you have anything you wanted to say about the fragile mental health of kids that they're talking about here?
Just in contrast, having just finished Hannah's Children, that amazing prenatalist book, I am thinking about the resilience and service done to kids who are in larger families, because they simply, by existing with so many other siblings, are given responsibility, are given the opportunity to be selfless, are given challenges, are given forced austerity in many cases that makes them resilient and makes them into much better people. And all these descriptions in the interviews that take place in this book of teens are of people who absolutely have their moments where they're struggling with depression and go through tough moments, because being a teen sucks and everyone goes through that. I mean, most people do. You're going through a lot of hormonal fluctuations, but that new babies that they suddenly get to care for and new responsibilities really just help them get over themselves. And
Absolutely.
it's so sad because it's what's also pointed out in this book is that a huge percentage of kids in developed countries, especially in the United States, will never be exposed to an infant in their lifetime unless they have a kid themselves, and at best has one sibling, which is a
Yeah.
very different dynamic. And I feel like I'm starting to realize that many of these issues that are seen now as de rigueur for normal teens today are not. They're more a product of teens growing up in very maladaptive environments that teens for the vast majority of human history have never experienced, and that's scary.
Yeah. Meanwhile, as a CSJ report makes clear, the number of ghost children is set to multiply and will continue to do so for many years. So again, it's not just the pandemic that causes this; is an increasing problem. They claim that this is due to the disastrous impact on lockdown on babies and young children who are now making their way through the education system. As one primary school teacher said to me, "It breaks my heart looking at the kids in my class. Either they are crippled by anxiety or jumping off the walls. Basically, they are just not happy."
Well, Octavian's jumping off the walls, but
Kids
he's also
should be
very
jumping
happy.
off the walls. That means you're
Yeah.
doing a good job,
And
but they
that's
don't know how to
another. I mean,
deal with
that's
it.
the classic issue of school now is, and why
Especially
boys
boys.
especially are suffering in school is teachers somehow think it's wrong that they can't sit down for hours on end at desks. What on earth, people?
Yeah,
Ugh.
I agree. And this is about stoking their will, as we said. That's your
Mhm,
job as a parent.
mhm.
The head of one primary school explained to me, usually around half of pupils arrive at primary school not ready to start lessons. After lockdown, this has jumped to more like 80%. Teachers are baffled to find 4-year-olds barely able to say their name and still in nappies. They are quick to blame the parents. No one mentioned how the complete absence of statutory services over the pandemic took its toll. Lockdown all but halted early years provisions. Drop in baby and toddler groups stopped. Parks and playgrounds were closed long after we knew the virus didn't spread outside. Again, like the mimetic virus was worse than the real virus. It just delighted in totalitarianly enforcing these systems. Even more extraordinarily, health visitors, a vital service and lifeline for new parents, largely disappeared, as did many GPs. New mothers were riddled with anxiety. Were their babies feeding properly, gaining weight? And the crushing fear for every new mother, did their babies have a disability? They had no one to ask. As one new mother said, "I feel very isolated and frightened. This is my first child. I don't know what normal is, and I don't know where to find help." Parenting Circle, a charity which aims to improve children's school readiness, points out that a 5-year-old who cannot play happily or speak properly is more likely to grow into a 9-year-old bully than a 13-year-old with school attendance issues, than a 15-year-old who joins a gang, and finally a 19-year-old behind bars. Unless serious remedial steps are taken to bring back the ghost children to stop their numbers growing, that will be their future. It's a disaster for society. And already, and I think basically what we're doing is we're raising a generation of hikikomoris. NEETs in the United States, there's already estimated to be 10 million. That means people who are not in employment, education, or training.
Well, and I was just actually right before we hopped on this call talking with I won't name it, but a recruiter that we know who works in tech and startup in the UK. And he's talking about how talented grads in the UK, especially because that's like a talented grad coming from Oxford or Cambridge, like a top UK university, is looking at a job that pays them 30K a year. They're just not taking the jobs. They're just not working because there's no point. They can't buy a house on that salary. They can't do anything on that salary. So they're just not going to do it. And I think that's another problem that he said he was encountering in the job market when recruiting talent, is that a lot of talent just doesn't want to work because why? They're not going to be able to buy a house. They're not going to be able to buy a car. They're not going to be able to start a family based on how people live lives now. Because the way that our life is run per modern society's standards, which are completely out of whack, are dysfunctional. And to that point about parents being so isolated and really failing to thrive, I think this also highlights how the downfall of communities, especially religious communities that allow high fertility families to not just support each other, but mentor new young families, parents with no kids, are causing knock-on effects and societal downfall. You take away those communities, and here now you have these isolated first-time mothers who have no idea how to do everything. Everything's so much harder when you are a parent of one child for the first time. The first time is always the hardest with everything, right? Practice makes perfect. And so you have these parents who grow up isolated from other families, who grow up with no guidance on what to do. So they think that everything's really hard because it is really hard for them. They don't have any more kids. And so they've made most of the sacrifices you have to make to become a parent. And yet they get none of the rewards of like having a big family, none of the payback, and nothing gets easier for them because they continue to not have that community that gives them perspective and advice and support. And I love that at the end of Hannah's Children, the big piece of advice is you have to bring back religious sovereignty. You have to allow religious communities to thrive and support each other. And you have to allow religious education to be executed without intervention and with support.
Yeah, absolutely. And another thing you were talking about this morning that I'd love if you go into before we go into more of the stats is how culture is changing among Gen Z, because there is some hope. You're saying that before the pandemic, that there was this culture of like in the dating scene.
Oh yeah. There's this Gen Z young lady writing on Substack who was talking about dating culture, and I think a Call Her Daddy 2018 dating advice episode that was kind of foundational for Gen Z in terms of these are the tips. And it was like, cheat or be cheated on, and sugar daddies are okay, and like just basically go out, be unethical, dating is war, have sex. And then there was sort of this ethical reckoning where I think this is maybe around the pandemic or a little bit after 2018, where the culture did start to shift and people just wouldn't consider being so callous and so transactional anymore, even though maybe kind of they still are. I think that was kind of the argument that she was making. Ultimately,
But I think
they're
you're
still
wrong about that. I think that the young generation, from what I've seen, is realizing that the way their parents are living isn't working, and this is what we're seeing in voting patterns.
Yes, and that's I think what you're also seeing this interest in religiosity again.
Well, yeah, for the first time in American history, you are seeing an increase in conservative voting patterns. What you are not seeing, and what you're wrong, there is a rise in religiosity. This is a completely ephemeral phenomenon that people want to make up. Some religious communities notice some young people who formerly were not religious or not in religious families moving towards religiosity. The problem is this population is much smaller than the young people raised in religious families that are leaving those.
Oh, yeah, that's a fair point. The attrition is much larger than the people who are getting God now.
Right. And so the people who are getting God, people are like, oh, what you actually see in young people, what is actually exploding is an appreciation that some of the stuff thrown out as society secularized, they shouldn't have thrown out.
Yeah.
But what is not happening is a moving back towards traditional religious practices. And I have seen this across the young people I know. They adopt religious practices that are much closer to ours, like the ones who are actually thriving. There's like these small communities of like ortho bros and like new Catholics and stuff like that. But they're not as big as the people raised to strict Catholic and Orthodox families who are leaving. And they also do not seem to be finding partners or having kids, which is really interesting. Whereas the people who are doing it more like you and I are doing it, which is like new religious ideas continuing to evolve and fortify religious practices to work in a new era. Pretty much all the ones I know, a lot of them are really young, but they're like getting married. They have long-term partners. They've made this shit work. And that's been really surprising to me how effective they have been. And I think it's because they are approaching a lot of these things functionally. It's like, I need to become a better person and adopt these religious systems for the end of finding a partner, raising the next generation, continuing human civilization. Whereas in this other community, it's more like a cargo cult where they think, a cargo cult mixed with a religion, which is even worse, where they think if they do all of the religious ministrations, then
ministrations,
then they will be given a partner and kids and a good life. And that's not the way it works. And so because they have this, ironically, it's their very faith that everything is going to work out that is destroying their lives. And it's sad to see, but yeah. So if we want to talk about the rise of gentle parenting, 2 studies here. One showed that 78% of parents are adopting gentle parenting techniques. This is a parenting style where you do not punish your kids, where you do not give them negative stimulation. Another shows percent, so we're looking at like 3 of 4 millennial parents is doing gentle parenting. That means that they are trying to raise children the way this study defined it, without intimidation or punishment, finally mentally scarring to a child. And then another was talking about TikTok videos that have the hashtag gentle parenting have amassed a staggering 2.5 billion views. And one thing I really want to emphasize here is this is the coward's way out. It is the easy solution. I love it how like people act when they see me punish my kid. They're like, oh, he must have lost control or something. Even though it's clear from even our own channel that we talked about bopping kids. We talked about the context in which we bop our kids. We talked about how we do it. We showed video of it like way before any of these viral things happened, whether it was The Guardian or me being in public recently, and it's clear that like this is something we thought through to protect our kids. No parent wants to punish their child. No parent wants to punish their child. That's the easy thing. Sitting down and trying to talk things through with your kids, that's the easy thing. The hard thing is setting boundaries for them. And boundaries that do not lessen their exuberance for life. When you sit down and you talk it through, you really lower the willingness of the kid to push boundaries in the future, because you're making it look like they emotionally hurt you by it's like, consider it this way. Okay, so there's 2 scenarios, right? A kid does something he's not supposed to do, bop, go back to your desk, ignore it. He goes, oh, I did something I wasn't supposed to do. I won't do that again.
And they know that too. I mean, it's getting to that point.
Playing immediately afterwards. It's not like you go down and you take that kid aside and you have this long conversation with him about how what he did is wrong. You're like really emotionally fucking up that kid.
No, you're rewarding the kid. Okay. If a kid's acting up and then you take them aside and you get down on their level and you make eye contact with them and you tell them about, hey, how are you feeling? Why did you do that? What are you doing? You're giving them one-on-one attention. That's a reward. You just rewarded your kid for having a freak out at the grocery store. What are they going to do? They're going to have more freakouts at the grocery store. Like, I can't emphasize how stupid of an approach it is. It's so bad. It's so bad.
Oh my God. I need to pair the grocery store video with the Boondocks episode.
Oh my gosh. Yes.
Anyway, 42% of teens now experience persistent feelings of sadness or hopelessness. This is from the Center of Disease Control and Prevention. And the closer you are to the urban monoculture, the worse all this is. 1 in 5 LGBT teenagers attempted unaliving themselves in 2022. That's according to the Trevor Project.
That's bad.
That's really bad. The problem was, I forgot, it was even higher among the trans community. 1 in 7 teenagers will experience a mental disorder by WHO now. 3 in 5 teenage girls reported feeling sadness every day for at least 2 weeks. This is from the New York Times. 3 of 5, so more than half of teen girls.
Well, I don't know. That's par for the course.
Youth mental health hospitalizations have increased 124% from 2016 to 2022.
I feel like that's clinicalization. Also, like, you call your doctor, you call anyone who's a professional now and say, hey, my kids, my kid frown. They'll be like, well, you better send them to the emergency room, because there's so much fear around liability, which bothers me. So I feel like part of this is an institutional issue, but I hear you. This is bad.
Oh no, but the liability issue is like society is constantly blackmailing us over raising
what
our
on
kids
earth, and fobbing things off to
they
professionals
don't do anything. They're
fix
like,
anything.
oh, a kid's not coming to school. Well, I guess that's like, it's like, well, I mean, obviously you need to be doing things different. And they're like, I don't know. Like, let's not like, let's not talk about this too much, man. I'm sure something will work out for them. No, it won't. The cuckoos are eating all the food, and that's the next generation's leaders. It is.
Lady Malcolm.
Or at least the leaders of the communities that are going to replace this portion of humanity.
55%
of Gen Z and millennials have been to therapy, with over 1 in 4 planning to stay in it forever. Over 1 in 4 Gen Z or millennials plan to stay in therapy for the rest of their lives.
We can't say it's not a cult anymore. We cannot say it's not a cult.
That's.
Excuse me, are y'all with the cult?
We're not a cult.
We're an organization that promotes love. And
Yeah, this is it.
Therapy
that's a
works when
religion.
you stop. You know, when you stop therapy and you get out, that means it worked. And if people plan on staying in it for life, that means that your therapist is like,
That means they built dependency.
yeah.
Or you're treating it like a religion or some sort of religious.
The Klugda is the holy guide to living pure. This will help explain. First,
Her name's Lorraine too?
we're all Lorraine, and you will be Todd. A name chosen especially for you.
Oh, yeah.
An oppressed minority?
You're a cult.
No, it is. Yeah, I guess again, it is meant in the urban monoculture. It is the thing that takes the place of religion, and that's honestly if you were to take recordings, and I hear this all the time about people talking about how important it is that your partner sees a therapist or that you see a therapist regularly. If you just replace that and was like, goes to church on Sunday and believes in God and lets God lead their life choices, it would suddenly make sense. Like, hey, you really need religion. Like, you got to get your house in order. Go to church. Have a moral system in place. And what has replaced that is therapy, which is
Well,
wild.
what's funny is it doesn't work as well. If you look at the
Of course,
statistics,
it doesn't work as well.
rates in people seeing therapists versus the depression rates in people who go to church or the unaliving oneself rates. And people will be like, "Oh, it's correlation." You don't get to claim it's correlation when 1 in 4 millennials plan to stay in it forever and 55% are going. Like, that's not a correlational issue. That's the therapy is causing the problem. Anyway,
Yeah. But also, I can't get over this realization that anxiety and depression and fear, they really are things that fill the void that opens up when your life is not full of things that matter. And that includes like just disasters. When the world is burning down, there's a war, suddenly your depression and anxiety, there's literally no room for them. Even when things are like, especially when things are disastrous, but also when you are full with work and meaningful stuff and there's literally no room for anything else. Again, there's no room for fear and anxiety and depression and malaise. And that's where religion fits it. Religion doesn't fix the stuff that's wrong. Religion makes no room for the void that is filled by the bad stuff.
I agree. And the next time, Simone, somebody in a public context, like they did at Hereticon, pushes back against you disciplining your kids, you need to point out to them that you not disciplining children is killing children. Not disciplining kids kills kids. Kids need discipline. Now, here is, and I think this goes against a lot of what people assume, is they're like, oh, this new generation doesn't know how to use screens. They're like freaking out about it. 75% of Gen Z actively monitor their screen time. 75% monitor.
What does it mean to actively monitor your screen?
Like screen time tracking apps, like how much they're using different programs. Like the program you use?
I don't use that. I know someone who uses it.
Okay, well, these programs exist that allow you to track how much you're using different things. People have used them for a long time, and 75% of Gen Z is using them. Gen Z is not out of control with screen time. It is not screen time that's causing this. Again, I can tell you as somebody, I definitely, growing up, middle school, high school, spent probably 6 to 7 hours a day in front of a screen when I wasn't at school. Like the idea, and I didn't have all of these issues. The idea, and I was on all of the chat rooms. I was on the worst of the chat rooms. I was on chat rooms before chat rooms had moderators. I was on chat rooms.
Don't you remember? Oh my gosh. Do you remember in those early chat rooms when we were first on them, the first thing everyone would say is ASL. Age.
Yeah, I was on chat rooms before they kicked
It's like,
out
well,
the
I'm an
PA
11-year-old girl and my interest is this, and there's no control. Oh, those were the good days, weren't they?
Yeah. No. We were hanging out there before there was even a token attempt to kick out the PDA files.
Yeah, no, it was just like, come on in. Let's start with an opener that's perfect for them.
And I think that this idea that kids shouldn't be on their screen is like, oh, if they're not on their screen, what the fuck are they doing? Playing in empty parks? Going to empty malls? Where do you think they're socializing if not on their screen?
Mm-hmm.
A kid who you've taken their screen from is a kid who you have locked in a proverbial hell.
Well, and again, people are on screens and scrolling and getting into doomorous loops because they're not allowed to go outside. They're not allowed to walk into town because their mom will get arrested. They're not allowed to walk to and from school because their mom will get arrested. They're not allowed to babysit their siblings because their mom will get arrested.
Sorry,
They're not
these are
allowed
all
to do
places
anything.
where the mom has gotten arrested. These are real stories.
Yeah, these
that
are
she's
real
going over
cases.
here.
Oh.
No, but we've seen this. I didn't think it was that bad. I didn't think that me just being angry at a kid would have 2 moms accost me at my car.
Yeah.
I didn't think that because I let my kids like walk around a playground on their own that I've had some angry old man accost me. I was watching from the car and he's like, "Oh my God, your kids are crying." I was like, "Kids are supposed to cry." He's like, "But they're crying." And I go, "Yes. What am I supposed to do? Stop the kids from crying every time they cry? Like, that's gonna fuck them up." Kids cry when they want to do something and it doesn't work out. That's something that people need to learn to deal with.
Yeah, that's play is learning your own boundaries and learning other people's boundaries. And gentle parenting removes that. It's terrible, deadly.
And even if it has some momentary effects while the kid is with their parents, when they go to work, so for example, 42% of Gen Z have thought about quitting their job within the last 3 months. So around half have thought about quitting their job in the last 3 months.
Makes sense. Because again, there's this realization that no matter how hard you work, you're not going to be able to afford anything anymore. So what's the point? You can't buy a house,
But
you can't buy a
this is
car.
because they're comparing themselves to the previous generation and not generations before that.
That's true. Yeah. Yes.
And then people
Well,
are like,
although to be fair, so generations before could buy a house, but they were small, tiny houses.
That's not true, Simone. Okay, so this is an effing lie that is told to people, and I'll explain the reality of generations before. If you look at, like, if you study anthropologically the way people in cities were living, if they were poor people, they would live in houses with like 12 other people, usually family members. They did not try to buy their own or rent their own apartments in New York. That is not a thing that ever happened historically for anyone but the wealthiest of the wealthy. And then people would be like, well, I could have gone to the frontier, the dangerous frontier with dangerous Native Americans who could kill you at any time. And they're like, and I could have like staked land there or gotten a house really cheaply in one of those regions. And it's like, yes, you could have done that. But today you can go to Africa and buy a cheap house. You can go to Latin America and buy a cheap house. That's where we got our first house. It was way cheaper than in the US and very affordable for most millennial remote jobs. But you're not considering that. You're not taking that seriously. And you're like, well, that would be dangerous. Well, the frontier was dangerous too. Well, that would require me to up in my life. The frontier required people to up in their lives as well. Well, that would require you have all of the environments, all of the advantages that somebody from, I'd say the 1890s, 1750s, 1700s, 1650s had. You just have deluded yourself. And people are like, well, people back then had more social connections. And it's like, they effing did not. They had more social connections if they stayed in the town they grew up in.
Yeah. Yeah. No. That is interesting. We maybe that's worth some additional analysis. Is the amount of, I don't know what the word is. So it's not social mobility, but the extent to which people do not live where they grew up anymore and keep moving. It both makes it very hard to form relationships, but also form community.
But they're choosing to do that because they value money over persistent relationships.
Yes.
And that's fine, but you've got to find ways to utilize that. And there are ways to make money and make fulfilling relationships online, as I did when I was growing up. All of my friends were online.
Mm-hmm.
All of them. All of my good friends were online for long periods of my life.
I mean, no, you had some great in-person friends.
I did during certain portions of my life, but not during every portion. And when I had good friends, you know how I did that? I'd go to the local, like at my college, go to the local bar and just walk up to any group of people I didn't know, put on my hand and be like, look, I'm new here, or I'm looking to meet new people. I'm Malcolm. Do you mind if I join the conversation? And this is something people don't do anymore. Because they are afraid of that group saying, oh, I'm sorry, I'm not interested. And groups said that.
Yeah, and it hurts, but you have to be okay with the hurt And every rejection is a rep. It should be seen the same as lifting a weight or bringing your focus back to your breath when you're meditating. It is a good thing. Yeah.
If your kids can't deal with the hurt, they're not going to deal with the world.
No. Well, and they're not going to do anything of consequence at all, for sure, because success is built upon a mountain of failures. You're not going to achieve anything if you don't try and fail a ton of times. Because if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. You're not doing something aggressive enough at all. The fact that failure is seen as a bad thing in the first place is embarrassing for anyone who believes that.
And the final thing I'll post here, which I think is interesting, is on the partisan gap in spanking, which is to say that spanking rates are actually increasing among Republicans.
Increasing. Well, good for them.
While decreasing in Democrats and independents.
No, I don't know. That's not surprising.
Just, that this graph, which unfortunately ends in like 2010s or like 2000, I think it might be 2015 where it's ending. The Republican spanking rate is over 85%.
Really? That's impressive.
Well, for Dems, this has it at like 64%. Unfortunately, ends in like 2010. And independents, it's around 70%. I think it's just like way higher than people realize as well. Historically speaking, my read is that it's fallen off a cliff in like the last 10 years. Like when you actually raise kids, it's like, oh, obviously kids need discipline. Duh.
Yeah. And it is possible to not discipline a child and have them not die. If you have one, maybe two. And that's most people who choose to have kids by a long shot. So I guess I get it. But even then, you're better off doing it. So.
Yeah. Anyway, I love you to death, Simone. This conversation has been very enriching for me, and I hope you had a wonderful day.
I did. We made some incremental steps forward on the things that mattered to us, which is what makes me happy in a day.
Exactly. And internal insight we have into who might be managing things within the government going forwards in terms of what hasn't been announced yet has gotten us very excited.
Yeah, very. So promising. 2025 is going to be amazing. Yes.
This is not brat summer. This is disciplinarian.
Bop
summer.
It's Bop summer.
I need to play the song with the Splatoon sisters in the fascist outfits here. It's cute.
Okay. Well, goodbye.
It's the cat girl authoritarians. Oh, I'll also put the one from what show is that? Helsing. Helsing has an alt-right cat boy in it.
A cat boy in it?
Cat girl. Well, yeah, an effeminate alt-right cat boy is in Helsing. Yes.
Oh dear. What is the problem, Herr Schrödinger?
Doctor, I'm sorry. I seem to have misplaced my handbook.
Oh, what to do with you? Go share with the captain for now.
Called Schrödinger.
Well, that's cute. Okay. All right. Well, you had me at Schrödinger. No, you had me at alt-right cat boy. So we're good.
By the way, he's not alt-right. He is an actual Nazi.
Oh, okay. Well, I mean,
but this is what the left calls us. So whatever. Embrace it.
Yeah.
I love you, Simone.
I love you too. Goodbye, Malcolm.
And so you sent out the Heritage Foundation email?
I did.
You did a great job with that, by the way.
Thank you. So, how do you like my Puritan collar? Speaking of Ukraine.
I love it, Simone. Did you get it from Ukraine? Is that why you keep mentioning Ukraine? Whenever you were here?
No, your mom bought 2 pairs of sweatpants and sweatshirts from Ukraine that came with these random collars. And I didn't know what to do with them because who wears a collar with a sweatshirt and sweatpant pair? But
they work perfect for this
with stays and yeah.
I'll tell you what, I find it cute, Simone. I think this outfit is very cute on you.
It's actually a good heat layer. So I kind of get I've been thinking a lot recently because our house is so cold about a lot of things that existed in the past and historians' answers for why they existed and why I think they really existed. And I think pilgrims wore these freaking collars because they're warm. I think Quaker Oats dude had this on because it was cold outside. And I was thinking also about like canopy beds like this over here, and why people would put canopies over them. And people were like, well, it was because vermin would fall from the ceilings and no one wants a rat to fall on them when, you're sleeping. And maybe that was a factor, but I think the bigger factor is that just breathing within an enclosed space heats it up. Because I keep waking up in the middle of the night and I'm like well under all of my blankets. Because like on our floor where our bedrooms are, like the kids' room is warm, but our rooms are like, it's 50 degrees. So I keep waking up under my covers and I'm very warm because I'm just breathing under my covers and it's heating the space up. If you cover that with a canopy and you have curtains and there's a canopy over, that thing heats up when you draw the curtains closed. So I don't think it was about privacy. I mean, it may be a little bit, but probably not really. And I don't think it was about vermin. I think it was about keeping the heat in.
Well, I think you're right. And I think that these people just haven't had to live like somebody from the 1800s in a long time.
Yeah, well, there's that one woman. There's a couple of historians, which there's this one British woman who does a lot of the actual work. Like she'll try different ways of washing linen clothing, and she'll dye. I was just watching an episode of something where she was one of the key historians, like living historians, demonstrating how Victorians celebrated Christmas. And one of the things she does, for example, with another woman is she dyes ribbons, and apparently what you use is like condensed evaporated urine to fix the color dye. And so here she is like pouring urine into a bucket. It just stinks, but like she does it. And I think, yeah, she's one of the only historians I've ever seen who is actively out there, like skinning chickens and baking the food in the old way. And yeah, when you actually start doing it and living that, then you see what it's like. And it's so cool that we live in this house built in 1790-ish that allows us to kind of experiment with that.
Yeah, well, and that we live a lifestyle of austerity, which is so shamed in the mainstream culture. And I think one of the things we're going to be touching on in today's podcast, which is going to come after this random chat, is really hurting people psychologically and emotionally. And there's so many pleasures that just you won't get to know if you don't live with hardship. You know, if you're not living, if you're heating your house in the winter, for example, you don't get to know how cozy it is and the quality of sleep you're going to get, when you cozy up in a freezing house.
Yeah, under a really nice warm blanket and a warm, cozy bed. Yeah.
Part of me actually thinks that seasonal affective disorder is maybe partially caused by warming houses in the winter, but I don't think that humans are supposed to like biologically designed to live in warm houses in the winter. And I suspect that might be what's causing it. It's like effing up our system. It expects it to be in the summer. It's like you can think of it seasonally as like when, when a ride, and I'll play the Mr. Bean skit here, when a ride's movements are out of line with its animation that it's showing you, and that causes intense.
Oh, and it's so creepy. Yeah. Like your body's telling you should be cold, you should be sleeping more, and yet the lights are telling you stay up late, and the heat is telling you take off your bundles, and the signals are crossing. That could be that is some potential
it might be like the car sickness, but emotionally speaking, from not enduring what you're supposed to endure every winter.
Yeah.
Anyway,
yeah.
And then the worst thing is that in winter, you're also supposed to be like eating a lot less. And because of that, people built all of these
eat more? Or I guess you eat a lot in the fall to build up that layer. But I think appetite increases in the winter. And appetite's suppressed during the summer, and appetite increases during the winter. So appetite increases when you're exposed to cold.
Yeah, because you would have less food around.
Oh.
You would generally in the winter have access to fewer calories because that's the way it works.
Yeah.
And because of that, you would generally be eating a lot less in the winter. And what happened as a result of that is they built a number of festivals into the winter season because you were not working the farm and you were already in a state of like half starvation anyway. So if you're going to have a community sponsored festival, this is when it makes sense to do it. And these festivals led to things like Thanksgiving and Christmas. But now what this means is that the winter season is just a series like Halloween, Thanksgiving, Christmas.
And Thanksgiving, by the way, used to be a day of fasting. It was not.
Thanksgiving was?
Yeah, dude.
Oh, I had no idea.
Yeah, no, it was a day of, solemn prayer and devotion and thinking about, kind of like a conference Sunday, just like of more.
Well, they fucked that one up. Explain to me what you're doing.
I make a paper and put it for subscribers.
Okay, and so why are you making them?
So I can sell.
You want to...
Yes, because I want to make money.
What if they're not subscribers?
If they're not subscribed, I'll tell them if they're subscribers. And if they say, I'm a subscriber, then they get a paper airplane.
Okay, but what if they're not a subscriber? If they say, I'm not a subscriber?
Then they won't get a paper airplane.
Okay, are they going to have to give you money for the paper airplanes even if they're a subscriber, or just subscribers get them for free?
Subscribers get them for free.
But the non-subscribers, they have to pay for them?
Yes, they have to pay. They have to give me money. They have to give me all the money they have to get a paper airplane. Because I want to make a lot of money.
What are you going to do with the money?
I'm gonna buy a lot of things. Like, whoa!
In notes here, I'd really love to hit the 30,000 subscriber mark before the end of this year. So if you are a fan of the channel and have not subscribed, please do. We really appreciate it. In addition, if you want to go to the Pronatalist Conference, where we will be this year coming in Austin, I think it's coming up in a couple months, you can get a discount code using the word Collins.